Welcome to the Data Connections blog at blogs.datadirect.com. My name is Sumit Sarkar, Solutions Consultant with Progress Data Direct. The topic today is on how to provide data for reporting purposes to individual tenants from a hosted multi-tenant SaaS application database. I will show you how Data Direct OpenAccess can meet your requirements. If you are new to OpenAccess, it is an SDK that allows you to quickly build a robust set of standards-based drivers built on the Data Direct Connect technology. The interface provider, or IP, includes the interfaces where you can add logic specific to your data source, and we'll take care of the other 99%. In this demo, I have an OpenAccess SDK server installed on my Windows 7 PC, and I've set up the IP code or those interfaces that you can customize in the Eclipse debugger, and I followed the debugging guide on our documentation. We then use the out-of-box pass-through sample IP written in Java that passes the queries through as is to a SQL Server backend database. And then once the Java IP is launched, we can extend any client. And in this demo, I'm going to use an ODBC client from a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet just for simplicity. And then we'll step through the code and show you exactly where and how you can create a flexible multi-tenant data access architecture without completely changing your SaaS environment. So let's begin. So the ODBC data source I'm connecting to here is named OA7 past JDBC. It's connected to a local host on port 29988, and this is basically where the OpenAccess server is listening, and that server intercepts requests and passes them through to the SQL Server database. And let me pull up my Microsoft Excel front end. So this Microsoft Excel is doing importing a select star from album, just a table having a SQL Server database. So I'm going to refresh it to kick off the OpenAccess SDK. Okay, so I've refreshed it and it's made a call out to the OpenAccess server, and here's where in the IP Connect interface is where the request comes into, and I can now break into my custom code where I can do some custom logic. So you can see that the client request from Excel using ODBC is passed in different properties. We've got the username, we've got a password, we've got different pieces of information, and also we have the IP custom properties. In my case, this IP passes in different information about the SQL Server database that it wants to connect to on the back end. But in your case, you may want to pass in information like a security token or other pieces of information to authenticate the client. And then based on this information, you can then choose to decline the authentication, or you can then set different flags to handle this request and how it accesses data and what data it sees. And so if we continue hitting the breakpoint, Microsoft Excel then connects, and then it actually starts to execute a query, which is select star from album. And so there's a rich API, a parse tree API you can then use to step through that query and get the different pieces of information to then maybe make a decision about this query request based on that user. And in this case, I'm just going to step over the IP format query. This calls into various functions, and I'll show you what they look like in the documentation. But you can see that after calling this, it has basically reassembled the query. So I've got this select ID, title, and artist from album. So I have the entire query that came in from the Microsoft Excel application request. And so at that point, I can continue through, and then you can see that the IP then makes this call against SQL Server. This is JDBC code. Is passing through the query to SQL Server and executes the query as is against SQL Server, and then it returns the results and passes them back to the Microsoft Excel application. And you can see that maybe I had a flag that set some kind of tenant ID, and I could then add that in as a where clause by changing the SQL and then executing against SQL Server, and then returning all the data that particular tenant might see. And that data comes back. There's not much in that table, but it returns the results. Another thing I wanted to show is the IP support array, which basically indicates how much or how little you want to code. So in the simplest case that I just showed you, you probably won't have too much the IP would support. It might be just a couple of lines of code you write. But this particular sample IP, it supports selects, inserts, updates, deletes, and various operations. So if you say you support it, then you write the logic for it. If you turn it off, then we take care of it for you. So you can see it's flexible, but you can get a prototype out very quickly. And I wanted to also show you the documentation we talked about earlier. So you see we have a full documentation of the different methods that we support for pass-through queries, and then in addition we have the documentation includes the IP interfaces and different methods that you can call from there. And I encourage you to download the sample and step through the different APIs, but in the easiest case you can just take the sample we have and just add a couple lines of code to change it and have a prototype running very quickly. So in conclusion, you can easily create data and expose it from multi-tenant database to individual clients by adding this logic in just two methods that I showed you, the IP connect and IP execute, and provide any standards-based data access driver to your client for reporting and analytics purposes. If you have any questions, I encourage you to visit us at the www.datadirect.com or leave a comment on our blog with any questions, and we'll be happy to get back to you. Thank you for your time.